What I found so interesting about this play was the differing in chapters of Fugue and the Prelude. In Fugue, it was direct dialogue of war events, and in the Prelude chapters, it was commentary between two different characters. And normally in this class, we're really used to reading plays, whether it's Intimate Apparel, which is episodic plot, or The Laramie Project, which is verbatim theater. So it was interesting to see a shift in the tone of the play, when normally we're used to reading a play with one tone throughout the entire thing. One of the themes that I noticed in this play was the idea of trust. And during the Fugue chapters where they do the dialogue, we see Elliot and the grandpa and the mom and the dad share stories about war. They share war complications, war moments, whether they're positive or negative, and they are sharing their stories to each other. And the fact that Elliot can tell his stories and feel a sense of trust with who he's telling it to is very important because of the PTSD he's going through. And they were able to share their stories, and the grandparents and the parents were able to share their stories with him to show Elliot that it's okay to share your stories about war, and it's okay, and we can trust each other when we share these stories. And two quotes that I found related to this are hostile down, target down, and Elliot gets very disoriented, but they're trying to get him out of his shell and to share his story and to overcome this sense of PTSD. And the second quote is, he doesn't know how he is injured, and Elliot reaches up his pant legs. The second theme that I found throughout this play was the idea of silver linings, and that's most specific with Jenny. And when Jenny's a nurse in the war, she experiences death, she experiences trauma, she experiences injuries, but the one thing that got her through it was meeting her husband, which is Elliot's father. So that's the silver lining of going into war, and that's meeting these people that she met. And so in such a hard time, she was able to find a slight bit of satisfaction. And two quotes are, I met this one Nurse Jenny. And the second quote is, did you heal all your patients this way? And that's when Jenny goes to kiss Elliot's father. When I looked up Fugue on Google, it had two definitions that came up. The first definition was saying that phrases and short statements that were comprised together to create a full story. And it's the interweaving of thoughts and developing of thoughts from very short phrases. And these reminded me of the Fugue chapters when both parents, Elliot and the grandpa, were telling their stories about war. They all had different short phrases that explained what they were going through in the war, but when they all came together and comprised one full story that we were able to read, which was the play. So that's the first definition, and I think that definition relates to the actual war itself, because they're explaining their stories on war and explaining what they went through. And the second definition talks about the period or loss of one's identity, and I think that relates to the Prelude chapters, where Elliot sort of recognizes his PTSD and goes through his PTSD to talk about what was happening in the war, because that is one of the main problems in the book, is that Elliot is suffering with PTSD. So I think that definition of Fugue relates to Elliot himself and not the war and the problems that Elliot is facing preceding the war. And my two questions for you are, do you believe that the constant talk about Elliot being a hometown hero provokes his PTSD or helps settle it? And my second question is, if you were in Elliot's shoes, would hearing stories about your parents and grandparents' experience help with PTSD?